What are you doing? Those are mine. I ran barefoot into the driveway, the gravel cutting into my feet as black smoke curled above a metal barrel. My father stood over it, feeding my textbooks into the flames. Then I saw the envelope. My name, **Nelly Carter, **, was printed across the front beneath the crest of the college I had spent years trying to get into. I lunged for it. Dad knocked it deeper into the fire. "Education is wasted on you," he said. "Go work as a maid." "Stop." He threw another folder in. For years, I'd cleaned hotel rooms and offices, saving whatever remained after bills because I wanted one thing: another chance at an education. Dad pointed toward the house. "Daniel built a real life. You're 30 years old chasing pieces of paper." Then he said the words that almost made me believe everything I'd worked for was already gone. "You were rejected, Nelly." I stared at him. "That can't be true." His eyes narrowed. "Why not?" "Because the college emailed me. They said my decision packet had been mailed." For half a second, Dad didn't answer. It was tiny, a hesitation most people wouldn't have noticed. But I'd spent years studying my father's face, learning when to stay quiet before his voice rose. And that hesitation told me something was wrong. "You didn't get in," he said finally. "Accept it." Behind him, another page curled into ash. I was 30, but after a string of financial setbacks, I'd moved back into Dad's house while rebuilding my savings. He never let me forget it. "My roof," he'd say whenever I disagreed with him. "My rules." Daniel never heard those words. My older brother was an army captain. Dad kept Daniel's military photograph in the living room where every visitor could see it. "My son did something useful with his life," he'd proudly tell people. Then he'd look at me. I knew what came next. I was the daughter who cleaned offices after dark and hotel rooms on weekends. What Dad never acknowledged was why. Those jobs had kept me alive while I studied, applied for scholarships, and worked toward the education I'd once thought was permanently beyond my reach. I watched the last corner of the college envelope disappear. "You had no right." Dad stepped closer. "As long as you're living here, don't tell me what I have a right to do." He ordered me inside. That evening, I sat on my bed staring at the college email on my phone. Decision packet mailed. So where had it gone? My phone suddenly rang. The name on the screen was Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, **, my former teacher, and the woman who had encouraged me to apply. "Nelly," she said immediately, "I've been trying to understand something." "What?" "Why did you decline the scholarship?" My fingers tightened around the phone. "Decline?" "Yes." "I didn't decline anything. Dad told me I didn't get it." The other end went completely silent. "Mrs. Brooks." When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. "Nelly, your father lied about your scholarship." I slowly turned toward my bedroom door. Downstairs, I could hear Dad moving around the kitchen as though nothing had happened. And suddenly, the question wasn't whether he'd burned my books. It was what else had been inside those flames. I found Dad alone in the kitchen that night, sorting through a stack of household mail. I stopped across the table from him. "Did anything from the college come here?" His hands stopped moving. "Not for long, just long enough." Then he looked up. "Who have you been talking to?" That wasn't my question. "Someone's putting ideas in your head, Nelly." I pulled out the chair opposite him. "Did my college send letters to this house?" Dad shoved the envelopes into a drawer. "Some things came." My stomach tightened. "What things?" "Advertisements, paperwork, nothing important." That answer made no sense. "How would you know they weren't important?" His expression hardened. "Don't start interrogating me in my own house." I remembered Mrs. Brooks's words. "You declined the scholarship." Except I hadn't even known I'd received one. Dad walked out, muttering that I needed to stop obsessing over college. The second he disappeared upstairs, I opened the drawer. Utility bill. Bank advertisement. Insurance notice. Then I saw something wedged beneath the drawer liner. A torn piece of thick white paper. I pulled it free. My full name was still visible. Nellie Carter. Above it was the return address for the college admissions office. Then I noticed the postmark. Almost 2 months old. My hands went cold. Dad had received something from the college weeks before he'd ever told me I was rejected. I took out my phone. "What are you doing?" I spun around. Dad stood in the doorway. His eyes dropped immediately to the envelope fragment. "Give me that." He stepped toward me. I raised my phone and snapped a photograph. "Why did you open my mail?" "I was protecting you." "From what?" "From embarrassing yourself." He snatched for the paper, but I stepped back. "You're 30 years old, Nellie. How long are you going to play student? I gave you somewhere to live when you couldn't support yourself." "I work. Cleaning rooms." The contempt in his voice landed harder than the words. "You could make a perfectly respectable living doing that instead of pretending some degree is going to transform you." I stared at him. "You told me I was rejected. You weren't going anywhere. That isn't an answer." I held up the torn envelope. "This was addressed to me. Did you open it?" Dad's jaw tightened. "Anything coming into my house is my business." That sentence changed everything. The fire hadn't started this. It had been meant to finish it. For nearly 2 months, Dad had known something about my application that he'd deliberately kept from me. I slipped the envelope fragment into my pocket. Then bright headlights swept across the kitchen wall. An engine stopped outside. Dad turned toward the window. Through the curtain, a long black sedan sat at the curb. There were military plates on it. Dad's face changed instantly. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he crossed the room, turned the deadbolt, and locked the front door. 3 hard knocks struck the front door. Dad glanced at me. "Go upstairs." "No." "Nellie." Another knock interrupted him. Dad opened the door only halfway. Then his entire posture changed. Colonel Hayes. Standing on the porch was Colonel Marcus Hayes **, Daniel's commanding officer. And beside him was my brother. "Daniel." Dad immediately unlocked the door and straightened his shirt. "What are you two doing here?" Colonel Hayes looked past him. "We're here to speak with Nellie." Dad's smile vanished. "Why would you need her?" I stepped into view. The colonel addressed me directly. "Ms. Carter, I understand you applied to a logistics and supply chain program." Before I could answer, Dad cut in. "She was rejected." Daniel slowly turned toward him. "Who told you that?" Dad hesitated. "Nellie did." "No, I didn't," I said. Silence filled the doorway. Daniel stared at Dad differently now. Colonel Hayes reached inside his coat and removed a folder. "Ms. Carter wasn't rejected." Dad's face drained. The colonel continued. "Nellie was selected for scholarship support connected to a military family education initiative." I gripped the back of a chair. "A scholarship?" Dad stepped forward. "This is obviously some administrative mistake." "It isn't," Colonel Hayes said. I looked at Dad. "You knew." "I knew nothing." "Then how did you know I'd supposedly been rejected?" He didn't answer. Colonel Hayes tapped the folder. "The college sent notification of Nellie's acceptance and scholarship." Dad's eyes fixed on it. "But something happened afterward." "What?" I asked. Colonel Hayes looked directly at me. "The college received a response supposedly from you." Dad suddenly moved between us. "That's enough." Daniel blocked him. "No, Dad. This is a family matter." "You made it a family matter when you lied about what she told you. Dad's voice rose. Both of you get out of my house. Nobody moved. For the first time I could remember, Dad gave an order and Daniel simply ignored it. Dad looked from his son to the colonel. His confidence disappeared. How, his voice dropped, how is this possible? Colonel Hayes held the folder against his chest. Because you weren't the only person who saw what was sent in her name. Colonel Hayes walked past Dad and placed the folder on the dining table. Dad followed him. There has been a misunderstanding. Then this should be easy to explain, Daniel said. Colonel Hayes looked at me. Mrs. Brooks contacted Daniel after speaking with the scholarship committee. I turned toward my brother. You knew. Not until yesterday. Daniel pulled out a chair for me. Mrs. Brooks told me you'd supposedly declined. That didn't sound like you. It wasn't. I'd work nights cleaning offices just to keep applying. Colonel Hayes continued. The scholarship was connected to military family educational outreach. I reviewed your academic record when your application was recommended. That explained why he was here. When Daniel contacted me, I asked the college to verify the withdrawal. Dad immediately said, "Withdrawal." Daniel looked at him. You seem nervous for someone who knows nothing about this. Colonel Hayes opened the folder. The college received a signed form declining Nelly's place. My throat tightened. I never signed one. I know. He read the explanation written on the form. Applicant has chosen full-time domestic employment instead. I stared at Dad. His favorite sentence echoed through my head. Go work as a maid. That wasn't me. Dad shook his head. Maybe somebody misunderstood something you said. Daniel stepped toward him. Then answer one question. How did you know about her scholarship? Dad said nothing. You told Nelly she was rejected, Daniel continued. But Nelly didn't even know she'd received a scholarship. So how did you know there was something to reject? Dad looked toward the hallway. Now every piece connected. The missing decision packet. The old envelope hidden beneath the drawer liner. Dad knowing my supposed result before I did. The papers burning in the driveway. And his face when that black sedan arrived. I looked at Colonel Hayes. Is my place gone? No. That single word stopped me. He explained that once Daniel disputed the withdrawal, the college paused the process. Copies of the correspondence had been preserved while they verified whether I had actually authorized it. My future hadn't disappeared into that fire. Not yet. But I needed to know how far Dad had gone. How many letters were there? Colonel Hayes pulled several copied documents from the folder. Dad immediately turned toward the hallway. Daniel stepped in front of him. Move. No. Daniel, this doesn't concern you. Daniel's voice stayed calm. You spent my entire life using me to tell Nelly she wasn't good enough. I'm not helping you do it anymore. Colonel Hayes slid the documents toward me. I reached for the first page. Dad tried to walk away again. Daniel blocked him. Dad. Richard stopped. Daniel pointed toward the chair across from me. You're going to stay here while she sees every letter you hid. I picked up the first page. My name was printed across the top. Congratulations, Nelly Carter. I read the sentence twice. Then I looked at the date. The college had accepted me nearly 2 months earlier. The second document was the scholarship notification. I had received substantial financial support through the Military Family Education Initiative. The third letter asked me to confirm my enrollment. Then came another notice. And another. Each one had been mailed to Dad's house. I laid them across the table, in chronological order. You got all of these. Dad stared at the floor. Daniel answered for him. They were all sent here. Colonel Hayes placed the final document beside them. It was the withdrawal form. My name was signed at the bottom. It wasn't my signature. The explanation above it made my stomach turn again. Full-time domestic employment. I finally understood what I'd watched burning that afternoon. Dad hadn't destroyed a random pile of books during an argument. He'd been destroying the physical evidence of something he'd been doing for months. You opened the acceptance letter. Dad said nothing. You opened the scholarship letter. Nelly. And when they kept contacting me, you answered them as me. I was trying to stop you from making a mistake. I pushed my chair back. A mistake? You're 30. You needed stability. I had a scholarship. You don't know that you would have finished. There it was. Not an apology. Not even denial anymore. Just the belief that he had been entitled to decide. I looked toward Daniel's military photograph hanging in the living room. You celebrated when Daniel left home to build his career. That was different. Why? Dad opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because he's your son. His eyes dropped. Or because if I got that degree, I wouldn't need you deciding what I was allowed to do anymore. Dad slammed his palm against the table. I gave you a home. Daniel stepped forward. And she paid for that generosity every day. Dad stared at him. Daniel had never spoken to him like that before. You stay out of this. No. Dad's expression changed. Daniel continued. Nelly earned this without your help. She worked nights. She applied. She got accepted. She earned scholarship support. He pointed at the forged withdrawal. You didn't protect her. You tried to make sure she never discovered she could succeed without your permission. Dad glanced at Colonel Hayes. That seemed to hurt him differently. For years, Dad had used Daniel's military career as evidence that he'd raised one successful child. Now Daniel's commanding officer had watched him admit what he'd done to the other. Colonel Hayes didn't lecture him. He simply turned toward me. The important question now is what you want to do. I looked down at the acceptance letter. Can I still enroll? Yes. Mrs. Brooks's suspicions had triggered everything in time. After Daniel contacted Colonel Hayes, the college compared the withdrawal with its previous correspondence and paused the process. Because the enrollment deadline had not passed and the withdrawal had been challenged before becoming final, I could personally confirm my place. I want it, I said. Dad shook his head. Nelly, think about this. I have. You'll leave here, spend everything you've saved, and when it falls apart. I said I want it. For once, his prediction about my failure didn't change my decision. I photographed every document and kept copies of the correspondence. Daniel looked at Dad before leaving. And don't call me tomorrow asking me to fix this. I'm your father. And she's your daughter. Daniel opened the door. You should have remembered that. Within the week, I packed. Mrs. Brooks offered me somewhere temporary to stay, while I arranged housing closer to campus. Dad watched me carry the last suitcase toward the door. You'll come crawling back. Months earlier, that sentence might have terrified me. Instead, I walked into the kitchen. The torn corner of the admissions envelope was still where I'd hidden it. I picked it up and slipped it into my bag. Not because I needed proof anymore. Because I wanted to remember the moment I stopped accepting his version of my future. I enrolled in the logistics and supply chain program with my scholarship reinstated. I didn't become ashamed of the cleaning jobs that had supported me. Those jobs had paid my bills while I built toward something better. Daniel stayed in my life, but his relationship with Dad changed permanently. He stopped allowing Dad to use his career as proof that his treatment of me had been justified. Dad remained in the same house. The difference was that neither of his adult children lived according to his approval anymore. And every important letter addressed to me now came somewhere he couldn't touch. Richard burned those letters because he thought destroying the evidence could destroy my future. But the day Colonel Hayes knocked on his door was the day my father learned my future had never belonged to him.